We've got a very interesting assortment of pieces tonight under the heading Stillness and Light, though I think the title actually does rather well. The first piece we're hearing is a piece for about slightly less than a quarter of an hour by the American composer Caroline Shaw, who won the Pulitzer Prize about 10 years ago, and since then her career has really taken off. This is a lovely, enigmatic little piece. It's extraordinary. Apparently, Shaw was inspired by hearing a classical minuet and trio from one of Haydn's string quartets. The minuet is the most courtly, the most formal movement normally in a classical string quartet or a symphony. And in this case, she partly bases her idea on that. At the same time, Caroline Shaw was really struck by the way that the contrast between the minuet sections and the trio section that comes in the middle seemed to her almost like entering parallel universes. So she's done that all the way through the piece. You'll hear, actually in the basic tempo, there's a sort of sense of being poised between two worlds. Is it 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, 3? So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, 2, 2, 3, 2. It keeps drifting back and forwards between the two. But then the drifting backwards and forwards gets much more interesting when the violins stop bowing their instruments in the classical way and start producing all sorts of other sound effects with them too. So the music shifts back between sounds that could almost have come from a classical string quartet at the time of Haydn and Mozart, and sounds that come from definitely our century. And what an interesting piece of time travelling it is, and also, at the same time, a really satisfying, atmospheric and evocative little piece. Well, after that, we come to Mozart himself, and I'd say, one of his absolutely greatest achievements, the Piano Concerto number 24 in C minor. Now, some of you, I know, keys are pretty arcane stuff, but I'll try and explain very simply that major and minor have a slightly different quality. Major, this is C major. That sounds quite bright and affirmative to me, and I hope it does to you. If you just lower the third of that, that's called turning it into a minor chord. And immediately, I think most people notice a kind of change in mood, don't they? That sounds tenser, darker, sadder perhaps. Music in the minor key tends on the whole to be more on the dark, melancholic side than music in the major key. Mozart quite possibly wrote less music in the minor key than any other of the great composers, the composers we cherish at the centre of the classical canon. But whenever he did write in the minor key, you could bet it was going to be something really special. It's as though he saved them for particularly special days. And this concerto is a marvellous example because it is so splendidly expressive and turbulent and full of contrast. 1 minute, Mozart seems very much the composer of the classical era, about order, about elegance, about the idea, as Aaron Copland beautifully designed classicism, as intensity against a background of calm. But there are moments when the intensity really actually tends to get a bit, well, I wonder if that background of calm is quite as steady as you might have thought originally, and you almost feel as if we are on the edge of romanticism. Beethoven is around the corner, and in fact Beethoven absolutely loved this piano concerto. You can tell that it was a real door opener for him. Terrific piece, with one of the most exciting and wonderful conclusions, I think, in all Mozart, ending firmly in the minor key, C minor. This is a tragic piece. We aren't left in any doubt about that at the end. But as I said, there's so many changes and fascinating complexities of mood along the way. As for the next piece, William Grant Still's Serenade, well, if you haven't heard of the name of William Grant Still, don't give yourself a hard time. I can remember being in Manchester's music library at the age of about 15 and seeing the score of one of his symphonies on the racks and helping myself to have a look and thinking, oh, I must hear that sometime. And then I waited about 35 years. But now, it has to be said, William Grant Still is getting the attention he deserves. He was an Afro-American composer who, despite the handicap in white America of being black, actually did rather well for himself in a lot of ways. He wrote some rather marvellous film music and did some arrangements for other people as well. And his music was certainly performed. And I think he was the first black composer or stroke conductor to conduct an American orchestra. Even so, it's only now that the real beauty and originality of what he achieved is really coming to be celebrated for itself. And this Serenade is an exquisite little introduction to William Grant Still. It was written, actually, for those of you who are interested in the chronology of music and what sort of era it sounds like it belongs to, it's actually, the date is much later than you'd expect. It sounds as though it might have been written in the 20s or possibly the 30s. In fact, it's 1957. But it's William Grant Still dreaming, perhaps, after many experiences of discrimination himself, of an age in which things might be better and in white and black relations in America might improve. There's still a lot of people thinking in those terms in America in the late 50s, and things were beginning to happen, particularly with the rise of great jazz musicians like Miles Davis and John Coltrane, that music attitudes might change. Well, it seems they've taken a lot longer to change than William Grant Still hoped. But this Serenade is a beautiful little piece. You don't need to know anything about it just to enjoy its really heartfelt lyricism, the loveliness of the harmony. It is just a gorgeous little classical concert miniature, and it's great to hear the RLPO taking it up. After that, we've got another classic from the American repertory, and actually rather nicely by the composer who probably did more to help and establish and encourage black musicians and black classical musicians in America than any other. Antonin Dvořák, who for a short time towards the end of the 19th century was director of the New York Conservatory, and there encouraged black students, studied black music, and actually wrote an article about how black music was the future of American classical music, which did not make him many friends at the time. Although his New World Symphony, in which he brought those ideas to bear, actually was a much more of a success. Now, this symphony, number 7, was written before Dvořák went to America, and he was still deeply drawn into the music of his own native Bohemia, which, as we now know, part of the Czech Republic. Dvořák's music, in some ways, can sometimes sound like Brahms. It can sometimes sound like it comes from that great German Romantic thing, except that there's a rhythmic quality that Dvořák has, which really shows how deep his roots were in Slavic folk music, which is, on the whole, more rhythmically interesting and lively than a lot of Western European folk music. For instance, the third movement, this is a favourite of mine. It's actually one of those tunes that comes into my head whenever I'm in a hurry to get somewhere. It's almost as though it's the music I need to urge me on. But it's a scherzo, but it's built on the rhythm of a Czech dance called the Furiant, which interestingly combines, as I was saying about Caroline Shaw's piece earlier, two different kinds of 3-time. On the top, we've got this little sort of waltz theme. That sounds like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, doesn't it? But the accompaniment is in a different kind of 3. And when you put those two together, the sense of a kind of rhythmic tug going on between two different kinds of 3 is tremendously exciting, develops an enormous amount of energy, and this really powers the music forward. You can see that too, actually, in the finale. In this case, those of you who read the advance publicity will probably have been intrigued to note that Dvořák was one of the earliest famous train spotters. Apparently he was obsessed with steam trains. He loved them. And when his son-in-law, future son-in-law, Josef Suk, turned up at his house, he demanded to know the number of the train that Suk had come to visit him on. Suk had very carefully written down what he thought the train number was, but unfortunately what he got was the depot number, and Dvořák was horrified and said, "This idiot wants to marry my daughter." He did in the end, but there you are, that's an indication. In the finale of this theme, though, you'll hear one idea of this symphony. You'll hear one idea which I think directly reflects Dvořák's tremendous enthusiasm for steam train. There's a theme which appears on the violins like this. The accompaniment to this is incredibly exciting. He's got two groups of instruments playing two different kinds of ta-ta, ta-ta, ta-ta. So I'm going to play it a little slower than Dvořák does so that it's easier for you to hear, because the piano doesn't articulate as well as horns or violins. But here we go. If you can imagine that going really fast, it sounds exactly like a steam train struggling up a hill or powering forward. It's an incredibly exciting movement. This is really, I think, one of Dvořák's finest symphonic achievements. It's a work in which he, at last, was able to stand up to Brahms, as it were. Brahms had been his great mentor and encourager for many years, and realized that Dvořák was a supremely gifted composer. But Dvořák also noticed, Brahms also noticed something in Dvořák, a tendency almost to write too much good music. In a symphony, said Brahms, you shouldn't be throwing sovereigns around all over the place. You must make a penny do the work of a pound. And that's exactly what Dvořák does in this symphony. Most of the ideas, the thematic ideas, are incredibly simple, like the one at the beginning of the first movement. It's quite amazing how much Dvořák manages to make out of that and its little following figure just like that. What Dvořák builds on from that is absolutely extraordinary. It's how to make the most out of a tiny, tiny, tiny idea. That's an idea that Brahms had learned from Beethoven and that he passed on now to Dvořák, except that Dvořák develops it entirely in his own way. This is music that is just so full of his love for his native Czech homeland. And for all its dark minor key character, there's a tremendous joyous and exhilarating, uplifting quality to it. Best of all, I think, at the very end, when finally it turns into the major key triumphantly, and Dvořák has the horns shoot right up to the top and then come sailing down again. It's a terrific end. And if that doesn't make you want to jump out of your seat and applaud, then I wonder if anything